right, welcome back to our maze crawl game. This is Lag Demon from Lag Demon Craft, and we're going to continue on with the process here of building maze crawl. So I've worked out a door that we're going to build in this episode. It's pretty nifty. It's an automatic door that lets you set it in a variety of different ways. Now, the one I created in testing things out was a swinging door, and I found that was a little bit problematic. So for our purposes, we're going to make a sliding door, but it's going to have two modes. It can slide sideways, horizontally, or it can slide up and down to open the passageway. And so to do that, we need to make a couple of simple assets. So really haven't done much here with the content area yet. We've played with a little bit of content that was already in game, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a new folder here, and I'm just going to call this folder Lag Demon. And under Lag Demon now is where we're going to put all of our assets that we create in various other folders, and I'm going to create a new one here that I'm going to call this set pieces. These set pieces are just physical objects in the game. There will be other directories for other things, but I just felt this would be a good starting point. And first thing we're going to do now is we're going to create a blueprint class. Now, in my swinging door, I had to create, using a tool called Blender, I had to create a door, and I'll go over there and show it to you really quick. This door I created because I needed to move the pivot point to the side because I was making it a swinging door. I'm not sure we're going to use that. No, I want to save changes. Because we don't need it, because we're just going to be sliding the door up and down or back and forth. So we're not going to be worrying about a pivot point. We want to make a blueprint that's based on an actor. Actors are things that can be placed into the scene, and things can be done with them. So this blueprint actor is going to be called Automatic Door. And we'll open that up. And of course it opened up this way. Come on. There we go. Now we're going to need several, we're going to need several components inside this door. And the first one we're going to need, add component. We're going to need a mesh box, or cube. A cube. And here's our cube, and this is the door that we're going to slide up and down or move back and forth. We're going to call this just the door. And the second thing that we need is a collider. And we need a box collision. But we don't want that on the door. We want it on here. Attach. There's a number of settings we're going to make in this. We don't want overlap all dynamic. We want to go to custom so we can turn a whole bunch of stuff off in here. Collision responses we want. We want to ignore visibility. We want to ignore the camera. We want to ignore all of these except the pawn. The only thing we want to activate this right now is the pawn. We may, no, it can't be stood on. It's not, it's no physics. It's query only. It's no physics collision. All right. So now we have our collision box, which we're going to call door activate. This is what's going to determine if we can activate the door. So I'm going to change perspective here to make things a little bit easier. I'm going to start by looking at the top perspective of this thing. And So that's our collision box. We won't worry about that in the moment. Our door, we want to do some scaling on it. I'm going to scale it down relatively thin, not that thin. I need to turn off snapping on scale. We'll just make it real thin. And then we'll go to our front perspective here, and we'll move it up, and we'll scale it up. Probably about like that. And we'll bring it down. We'll look at this. We may come in here and do some rescaling of some of this stuff. So now we'll take a look at our collision box here, and we'll move it into an appropriate position. We want it to be about the same size as the door. So we'll go into scale it out a little bit wider than the door, about as tall as the door, and then we'll go to the left perspective here, and we'll scale it out a little bit so that when you step within this zone on either side of the door, it will activate. We'll compile and save that. Now, before we go any further, let's double check this and see how this is in relationship to, I'm going to do a save all here, how this is in relation to our character. So yeah, it looks to be a reasonable size relative to the character. He can walk through that pretty easily, so that'll make a pretty good door. So we'll move, this will be our test door that we'll play with in game to check it out. So we'll move it over here out of the way so he's not standing inside the collision when it first comes on. We won't worry about a door frame or anything right now. We're going to worry about the activation of the door. So let me do a save all. And let's go back to our automatic door. Now a couple other things that we can do. Excuse me, go back to perspective mode here so we can see this a little bit better. So there's our door. Okay, so now here in the that's physics materials. Here's our cube mesh. Let's come in here, and there's an asset here called SM door. It's kind of nifty. Oh, nope. I didn't want to do that. The door. I wanted the material. That's static mesh. Materials. What I wanted was door. Sorry. Door material. There we go. So now we got a fairly nice looking door. Let's take a look at that in the game. It looks at least reasonable. Let's walk over to it, see how it looks. So at least it doesn't look like a white box anymore. So we'll come up with some better graphics. These are just assets that come with the engine, and I just grabbed that one for a little bit better look, something to look at rather than a white box. Okay, so now we're going to go over to our event graph. Now, first thing we're going to do is get rid of all these events because we're not going to use any of them. We're going to select our door activate, and the first thing that we want out of door activate is a couple of these events. We want on component begin overlap, and we want on component begin or end overlap. Those are the two events we're going to deal with. We're also going to be working with input from the keyboard on this because I want to set it up so it can manually activate, where you have to push a key, or it can be set to activate automatically just by walking up to it. So to do that, we're going to come over here to settings. We're going to go to project settings, and down here under input, we're going to go in here and we're going to add a new mapping. And the new mapping, I'm just going to call this action activate. And for now, we may rearrange this later, but for now I'm going to use the F key. That seems like a good key to use. That's right here by the ASDF or WASD keys that we use for movement, and the F is right there, so we can just hit it and activate something. Also, the UI at some point in time will show you some indication when you're in a zone like this that can be activated. We'll coordinate that all later. For now, I want to set this up so that it at least it can reasonably be expected to utilize that sort of thing. Now, to do this, oops. We're going to need several variables. We're going to actually, we need not only several variables, but we need several enumerations. And let's see what we have here. We created one for third-person blueprints. Okay, that's the perspective mode. So we created this enumeration for perspective mode. But we also want an enumeration for the player activation status. And the player activation status is whether or not the player can be pushing a button or not. Yeah, player activation status is in range or out of range. Right. So, and I believe I put that into player, but I think I'm gonna put it here with my door because we're gonna have other set pieces in here that also use it. So it seems like a good place to do it. So here under blueprints and enumeration, we're gonna create an enumeration called player activation status. And this will change on a particular item whether or not you're in range or out of range of activating that item. So it'll just be called in range. I'm going to make that caps. Oops. In range. We'll add a new one. Out of range. So there's one of our enumerations. The next enumeration that we need is door status and door mode. So let's create a new enumeration, blueprints, enumeration, and we're going to call this door status. Open it up, new, and it's just going to be open. Oops. Open. Oh, great. Once it's got it, open to OPN, yeah, open or closed. And then the last one that we need, blueprints enumeration, is called door mode. And door mode is going to be manual or automatic. Okay, let's save all those. And I'm going to mark all these for add. I'm not sure why that wasn't already connected to source control. So we'll just make sure these are all in source control. And okay, so we'll go back into here. Save all. Okay, we're good. Now, for a user to be able to push buttons on the keyboard and send input in, input has to be active. So that's the first thing that we're going to do here, is set up and determine how to enable input and disable input based on whether the user is within this collider, where we get these activation events, where we get these overlap events from the collider. So one of the first things I want to do here is make sure that this other actor, this is the actor entering the thing here, is in fact cast to pawn. Cast to character. Third person character, that's what we want. Cast to third person character. This will fail if it's not a third person character that come in here, and we're just going to ignore that because we don't want any other character but the third person character to actually activate this. And then what we're going to do next is get the player controller. We need that on both of these, by the way. So we go cast to third person character for entering, beginning the overlap when you enter the region, and end overlap when you step out of the region. Now we need to get the player controller. And using this player controller, we need to enable input. Now it put it into the target, when in actuality it should have put it into the controller. I don't think this is necessary on the target. So when we enter it, we're going to enable input on the player controller, and when we exit this, we're going to disable input. Here's the disable input. We enter it, and that's our player controller. Oh, sorry. This is our player controller. Okay. So that enables and disables input. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to set this in range, or rather create a variable called player activation status, and it's going to be an enum of type player activation status. And we want to set this player activation status here to in range, and we'll set it here to out of range. I'm going to make this visible, and we'll test this little aspect of this by first we'll make sure this is selected, and we have here where is it, default in range. Player activation status is currently in range. We'll play. Come out of this, go select this again, make sure that says that's in range. And now we'll walk up to the door. Oh, it says in range. Player activation status is not changing. Again, I'm doing something weird with the tool. I thought that I would see that change. Player activation status, we want to set it default to out of range. That, I believe, was the default. What we want to do is set a watch on this. Right here. Add breakpoint, no. Collapse macro, break links, find references. There is a way to set a watch. Watch this value. That's what we want to do. Compile, save. Let's move this out of the way. Watch this value. Watch player activation status. No debug data. Why? Okay, it set it and it unset. Set it to in range and out of range. I'm a little confused as to where I can actually watch this value. I will figure that out as we go along. There's some aspects of this that I don't entirely understand within this tool, but that's okay. We know it's firing, and it is, in fact, setting that variable because this is firing, so it's going to be setting it to in range and out of range. Now, the next thing that we need to be concerned about is how we're going to move, darn it, how we're going to move our door. And we're going to move the door with what's called a timeline. So we're going to create the timeline first so that we can get that set up and ready to go. And so we're going to add a timeline into here. And we will call this door open close timeline. We'll use the same timeline for opening it, closing it. We'll either play it or reverse it, depending on which mode we're in. So we'll open this timeline up, and what we want to do is add a float track to this. This gives us a graph, and we can create basically a function in here that goes between periods of time. So I'm going to right-click and add a key here at the beginning, and about 2 seconds down, I'm going to right-click and add another key. We're going to adjust these precisely. I want this time to be time 0, and I want this value to be 0. And on this key over here, the time to be 2 seconds, and this value here to be about 300 for the moment. Okay, so yeah, we're going to set that to about 300 centimeters, or about 3 meters. We'll probably adjust that once we see what the door actually does, but that's a good starting point number. Now we'll come over here and we'll bring this down so that we can see it and see our nodes. Now, I don't like things that just immediately start moving, so I'm going to set this into auto, which is going to give us a really nice curve. So it'll start off moving slowly and pick up speed, move, and then it'll slow down when it gets towards the top. And we can adjust that. We can put more keyframes in here if we want to tighten that up a little bit. We'll worry about that after we see how it looks. We'll compile this and save it. So this is going to control the position of the door, and I'll show you how that works. Go back here to our event graph. When we play this, we're going to play it. Initially, we're going to set up hitting the key. Okay, we'll worry about the automatic mode afterwards. So at the moment, when you get into the zone of it, you'll have to hit the F key to open the door, and hit the F key again to close the door. So what we want to do for that is go input. Is it input? Oh, that's right. It's what did I call it? Let's go back to settings, project settings, input, action activate. That's what I called it. So I'm going to right click here and just type in action activate. And there's our input action, action activate. And when it's pressed, we're going to play. But we're only going to play, and we're going to play in a certain direction depending on this logic that we've set up. So the first thing we have to determine is, are we in range? Okay. So let's move this back here a little bit. So we'll create a branch. And the condition for this is we'll grab this player activation status here. We'll get it. We'll say equals in range. So this branch will return on the true side if our action, if our in range or our activation status is in range. This will return on the true branch, and will either play or reverse. So we've got to make it determine what that is. So when we press a key, either nothing will happen. Well, yeah, we'll do it on key press for now, rather than release. Now, whether we're opening or closing is going to depend upon the door status at the time. So we need a new variable here. We'll call this door status, and its type will be door status. We'll compile, and we'll set it to default closed. We can change that when we set up a particular door. We might have a door that's default open, and you can close it. In which case we'll have to set things up appropriately, and we'll probably need some other features to this. But for now, we'll keep things as simple as we can. So we've got our door status, and we're going to set the door status depending on what we do over here. We're going to switch it back and forth, and I'll show you how that happens. But we need to make a decision here, and what we need to do is a select. No, I always get them backwards. It's a switch on door status. We want to switch on the door status. Now, the logic here. If the door status is open, we want to close the door. So we want to run this in reverse. And if the door status is closed, we want to play this and open the door. Okay? And we'll see how that happens in a moment. Now we need our timeline. Where'd our timeline go? I created a timeline. Oh, this is the timeline. Duh. What we want to do now is get this door. This is our door whose position we want to change. And what we want to do is look at the set location. Set relative location. We only want to move it relative to the object that it's in. And the new location, I'm going to split this struct spin pin. So the new location, and I always get confused as to what is up, but we're going to plug this update into not the update. We're going to plug the update into here and update this. And while this is new track 0, I should fix that. New track 0. We should call this door position. Compile, save, event graph, and we'll plug this into the Z. Yes, we'll plug it into the Z location. Now, at the very least, when we push the F key, we should see the door rise. Let's test that and see what happens. So now, if this is working, when we move into position here and press the F key, well, it went up, but it went down first because it's not at 0. So, yeah, because I'm just setting the relative location. That's probably not what I want to do. Get relative. All right, I'm going to pause the video here and figure this out, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I was doing this right, but what I had done was here in the viewport, I had shifted the door up, and its center point is here in the center. If we had moved, done this door in Blender or something and put the anchor point down here, we could have it up here and everything would be 0, 0. What had happened was the doors transform over here. The Z coordinate was set to about 100. So that 100 was down near the floor, and so it pulled it down to 0 and up and so forth. and so yeah, we can see this now. We run over here and we hit the F key and it moves up. And I changed this from 300 to about 200, so it just rises up about its own height there. Into the wall or whatever, and disappears, so you can run through. We'll put a wall around this in a few minutes just to see how it looks as a door. But first, we need to go over here to the event graph and we get the door close functionality working. So what happens when we know we're in range and we push the F key. The question is, what happens to the door? How do we, at what point in time do we run this in reverse? Oh, that's right. It should happen automatically. Oh, we just have to set it. So we take this finish out here. So let's get our door status. Set our door status. We want to get our door status. Get door status. We want to select if it's open, we want to set it to closed, and if it's closed, we want to set it to open. And we want to do that when we're finished. So once the animation finishes, whichever way it goes, if the door status is right now open, when it finishes, it'll set the door status to closed. And if the door status is closed, when this finishes, it'll set the door status to open. And now it should be reversing or reversible. So we can go up here, hit the F key, it rises, hit the F key again. What did I not hook up? Reverse, in range, well, let's watch our graph here and see what's happening. Let me move this window out of the way. When we walk up to the door, we should see something light up here in the upper left hand. Yep. Now we push the F. Push F. And there goes the animation, and it's finished, and it sets the door status. Okay. Now we push F again, and it does not. Yep, it's reversing. Okay. So I'll show that to you. Here's our game. Push the F, it rises, and push the F again, and it goes down. So it's not very snappy takeoff as part of the problem. It takes off pretty quick there, but for some reason doing the reverse is a little slow, and I think I know why. Seems to have. Oh, there it goes. Let's look at our graph again. I want to set that to auto for one thing. I think I want to tighten this up a little bit. Let's add a key here. Let's rotate it, and let's move it in a little closer to this. So it's got a little curve to it, but it's going to be a little snappier. Let's add a key here as well. Rotate it like this. Pull it over here. Get this line a little straighter. I don't want to have overshoots. I don't want it to spend a lot of time up there. I want it to be mostly straight. I think I need to rotate this like this and just bring it over. Well, I'm going to bring it up. Set it like that. Bring this over. Bring it in close to it. Up close to it here. And rotate it. Well, it's mostly linear at that point. We could probably delete that and just go back to linear and see how it looks with these set to linear. See if it's a little more snappy that way. Save, play, walk up to it, hit the F key. Yeah, it takes off immediately. I wonder why it's delaying on doing the reverse. Interesting. Maybe it's because it wasn't finished yet. Well, anyway, that is the door opening and closing. I think we'll come back to doing the automatic stuff a little later. It's a little tricky on the logic, and I want to examine that a little more closely. I'm not entirely sure that my logic was perfect, but we do have a door we can open and close now, and we can incorporate that into the UI. So when the character walks into that, and this thing, this door status here, excuse me, the player activation status changes, we can actually set this up with an interface to fire off from here a signal which will tell the UI to display an icon of some kind, letting the player know that they can click their E key to open the door. So that is looking pretty good so far. So I think what we'll do now is just we'll build a little wall here and put our door in it and see what happens, see how it looks. Okay, we have a little update here on why the snappiness, why it was taking so long on reverse to start moving. It's really very simple. I forgot to set the length of the timeline to 2 seconds. And now it's 200. We don't want that. 2 seconds is the length of our timeline. And our endpoint here isn't quite at 2 seconds, and I'm not sure how that ended up changing. I thought I set it. We're going to set that to 2 seconds, and we've got that to 220, and now it's right at the beginning and the end of the timeline, and that is why it was taking a couple of seconds before it would start moving, because it was starting at the end of the timeline and going on here. It was also taking that extra couple seconds before it finished out at the end. So we'll compile that, save it, play it, and come over here to the door, hit the F, it immediately takes off, hit the F, and it immediately starts closing. So that solved that problem. So what we can do here is go to basic, geometry. Here we go. We'll do we'll put a box down here somewhere. So this is a BSP or a brush And we'll go find some in here starter content. I'm sure we've got some nice materials that we can throw on here. We can make it a rock wall or brick wall or something. Throw these on there. We can scale this, make it more wall sized. Slide it over here a little bit. Oops. Expand this up, expand it out. Okay, that's looking a little bit better. And drop it down. Then we should be able to take a box. Let's get this. F. Darn it. F. Let's go into front mode so we can see what's going on. Let's take this. Is that our big wall we just created? And yeah, that's our wall. This is our box that's going to be our door. Pull it over here. And it's pretty close to the right height. Let's scale it this way. A little bit. Let's see how we look here. Go to perspective mode. Oh, we got to move this back into the door now, or back into the wall. And brush type subtractive. Okay, we do have a hole in the wall now. We can grab this one, push it back there, and we see that our hole's a little bit big. So we can grab this subtractive brush here. There it is. And we can go to scale. Scale. Oh no, that's that guy. Oh well, why not? We'll just scale him out a little bit. Move him so he fits in that hole real nice. Now, it's not perfect, but we have a wall now with a door in it. We can come up here, hit F, and we can not walk through the door because the VSP has a collision mesh over that area. So I think there's something that I need to do here. Okay, I got it figured out. So it wasn't the wall at all that was having the collision. It was the door. I wasn't pushing it up high enough, and I was hitting my head on the bottom of the door and unable to pass through it. So yeah, so it's working now. That's all it was I needed to raise the door just a little bit higher. And the door goes up out of sight, and we can now walk through the wall. And this wall, I changed the texture on it. That other one looked kind of ugly. But yeah, there it is. And when we're here, we can also close the door. We should be able to close the door. There it goes. And now we can't walk through it. So we can put a door frame around this and do all kinds of other fancy things. And I didn't do that terribly accurately. I'll probably fix it up and repair it a little bit before I get in there. But there we go, a sliding door, a vertical sliding door. I'm going to, I probably won't bother doing the left-right sliding with you. I'll do that on my own, and then I'll just show it to you and show you how it works and explain the blueprint a little bit on the next video. Because it's basically the same, just moving in a different direction and a little mode change as to which way you want the door to go. So that shouldn't be a big deal at all. So That's all I have time for now. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.